Hey everybody, Purple Druid here with a very special World of Worth fantasy roleplay video. Today I have Valmar Erebus from Twitter, and we are going to discuss the pros and cons and relative merits of different methods of timekeeping. And there's been a lot of discussion on Twitter in the last week or so. Keep in mind, we are recording this on February 13th in 2024. I don't know when you're going to be watching. But there has been a lot of back and forth and a lot of what some people call debate. I would call it discussion um, about 1-1 downtime pacing or 1-1 timekeeping versus press pause and other methodologies. So, hello, Valma, or I guess I'll call you Sunny, and hello and welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad that we're able to sit down and do this and without having to limit ourselves to a certain number of characters and having hundreds of people jump in and muddy the waters.
Right, and to try to derail things. Yeah, so I guess basically myself, I am a big proponent of the practice of maintaining a strict calendar in the campaign that is tied to the real life calendar. And for a long time, a couple of years, people have been talking about this, probably 3.5 years or so. Um, and they call it different things. Usually it's called 1-1 timekeeping. I prefer the term 1-1 downtime pacing. And the reason I
Mhm.
say that is because ideally or hopefully it avoids the confusion of people thinking that you're tracking activities during a session matched to the real world clock as opposed to what it is, which is tracking time outside of session. And for myself in my campaign, when it is today is February 13th, which means that it's February 13th in the campaign. And when February 28th rolls around in the real world, it will be February 28th in the campaign. And so it flows at a predictable and uniform rate so that I, as the referee or dungeon master, can plan ahead, create plot points. I can roll for random events in advance and say this is going to happen on February 16th, this is going to happen on February 20th, and so on and so forth. And likewise, the players can plan ahead if they have a session today on the 13th and their character gets enough experience to level up, and so they have to go into level training. If they adventured until, say, the 19th and they have to train for a week, then they'll be back on the map, as it were, or on the calendar um, for the 20th. So that's pretty much what I do. And the reason I picked that is because when I started this campaign in March, um, I had said online that I would run the Tanisborg dungeon when the book came. I had
Mhm.
ordered it in a pre-order, and a lot of people were interested in getting involved with that. So when it showed up, I tweeted that it was here, and I had a lot of interest in people participating. In fact, so much interest that I had to set up 2 sessions per week. So one session is on Tuesday and one session is on Thursday. And
Separate groups, or is that
separate
completely?
groups, separate groups completely. So there are two discrete groups. So for instance, players A, B, C, and D are on Tuesday, and then E, F, G, and H are on Thursday. So they're different players, and they've bonded into adventuring companies, if you will. The Thursday group actually is my original home
But
game.
they can affect each other.
They definitely
That
affect each other,
Yeah, they can.
absolutely.
Okay, okay. That's what I mean.
And because it's the same campaign, and that is why I chose to go with the strict timekeeping and to slave the calendar in the game to the calendar in the real world. And initially, my hope and my goal was to run a faction based campaign where the players would figure out how to leverage the one-to-one downtime pacing in order to explore a mega dungeon. Because a year ago or so, there was a lot of discussion
That
about
would be impossible.
how
Yep.
it would be impossible and how that wouldn't work. Um, Now, fortunately or unfortunately, as it may be, the players have decided that delving the mega dungeon in an extended format is not their bag. And so they've been doing a lot of different things. They do explore the dungeon. Some of them have gotten down to as far as the fifth level, which is pretty cool. They've interacted with different factions that are down in the dungeon. They interact with factions that are in the main city. They interact with non-human factions. Um, and so it's been a lot of fun, and it's been easier to maintain than I suspected. For a while, I thought it was going to be very, very hard. And for the first few months, it was extremely time consuming because I was logging session reports for every session.
Mm.
So if you go on the blog, you'll see that there's 27 session reports, and we're actually up to like session 80 now. I just had to stop doing the session reports.
Yeah, that's something I've pushed on to the players, so to speak.
And
They
you know what?
let it.
I even tried that. I was giving them experience point bonuses if they would write a
Yep.
session report, or if they would, like, there was a like 100-point bonus if they would transcribe their notes and send them to me, and there was a 500-point bonus if they would write a session report in a narrative style from the point of view of their character. I got a few of those and I published them, but
Yep.
again,
Actually, I'm really glad.
it's
I'm
time
very happy
consuming.
to see him up because it shows how similar we really are in the end. And not that you have ever done this, or but like, there's none of that bluster pretending this isn't really happening, where players are not as engaged as other, some players are not as engaged as other players, or you and I as the dungeon master, etc. Um, it really is similar. Everything you're saying, it's so funny.
Well, and it's interesting you bring that up because even in my previous game, when I only had a Thursday night session, and there was pretty much the same group of players that played every week, and we transitioned from the traditional normal timekeeping to a strict 1-1. There are some players who play more during the week,
Yeah,
in between sessions, and they have their characters do things, and there are some players who don't, and that's fine. I expect that. However, because there are two sessions, and because there are anywhere from 6 to 10 players at a time, running anywhere from 12 to 20 characters, um, in my opinion, keeping it slaved to the real life calendar is very important because it keeps things from getting too out of sync, and it allows for both groups to adventure in the same area.
yeah.
And then it also mechanically, what's the word I want to use? I don't want to say induce. It's not in.
I think the key, if you don't mind me saying,
No, go
is
ahead.
is more so than even the amount of players. It's the style of. I don't want to say they're against each other because I don't know what their dynamic is with what the two parties is within your campaign, right? But if they were against each other, certainly the one-to-one, so to speak, um would keep that in line, right? Because if I have to know where they're going to meet if they're going to fight and such, and it would just be much easier to do it your way. Um, I do get it, which we'll talk about later, and I'll show it on my calendar. I do end up out of sync, right? But because that dynamic is not happening, it's in more limited scope. Um, the party in my case, it's one party, right? And they tend to stay together. And even though we actually have multiple what I call campaigns, which I did not know there was much of a disagreement on the use of the word campaign. Um, but I'll explain. Either way, it'll be understandable that we have another full campaign going on in another part of the world, which has somewhat started to affect um, the one we're running currently, and I'll discuss how like we resolve that issue.
Yeah, absolutely. The well, and one of the things I find to be most fascinating about this particular campaign is how the two groups are really they're really playing two different games. Um, the Tuesday group is very objective focused. They are very task focused. They have a plan and they leverage the downtime between sessions to do things that would normally, if you did them in session, could suck up, half an hour to an hour. And then you're down to, maybe because we play a 4 hour session. So
Yep.
then you've only got 3 hours for the actual adventuring.
Yep.
Now,
Yeah, mine are actually even
the
shorter.
funny thing
So
is the example I used in the video, they only played for an hour, and
yeah,
that's how long it took them to get that far and out in the future. And both of the participating players were very concerned about something that had happened the previous week as a random encounter, and they didn't want to leave their home base exposed for a whole week. And so that's why one of them decided to stay on and play out through downtime through the 16th, and the other one went home, so he was back by the 10th. So that way he'd be home in case anything happened. In case anything happened,
yeah, yeah.
um, which I don't think something like that would happen in a traditional pause time campaign. We would have just played out to the 18th or the 20th or whatever, because I don't think that, and I could be wrong, but I haven't seen many examples of this where people are doing random events that happen throughout the week in between sessions.
I think the difference. I know what you're getting at, and I mostly agree with you because but only because I think most people using a different time system or none at all, because that let's both. I think we both agree that that's too common as well. Um, I actually play in a game I play in two games that don't use any time system at all. And they're great games, right? But you're definitely not going to get the type of, I like to call it living world, I guess, but I'll go off on that again later. With no timekeeping at all. But I think it's what you just alluded to is more because people just skip it over, right? Like I wasn't saying earlier when we had spoken offline that you had your one character at a certain day, and then the other two were, I think it was only like 3 days ahead, but they were a couple days ahead. In most cases, what would people do? They'd probably say, "Oh, that's convenient. We could just skip ahead and be all on the same time schedule again." So in my case, I wouldn't do that. It just wouldn't be tied to the real world. It would be, we would just play it, whatever it was that was going to occur. We would play it, and I would just do it as game time, so to speak, which
Right.
in a way is a better descriptor of my style of calendar. And I'll use pause time as well, but I feel like saying in-game calendar is a little more relevant, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does. So while we're here, why don't we go ahead and chat a bit about your calendar? And I'm going
Okay.
to pull it up on the screen so people can see it.
Perfect.
Now, I'm showing the Discord streaming screen, and so Sunny will be able to talk and move the screen around at the same time. So I will leave that screen off to you, and if you want to talk about, how something works in your game, and if there's an example. Now I do want to touch on an example that someone used on Twitter today, which was, what if a party of characters gets on a ship and sails away for 2 months?
That is awesome because that is right here in my example.
Awesome, awesome. Because I
Well,
want to, I
I'm
want to, I
actually
want to talk about um, how you would handle it, and then how I would handle it.
perfect. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I this is happening at a great time in my campaign because um, all of these things are happening, and so I could show it right here on the calendar. This is between 2 sessions ago. Yeah, we're only going back like 2 sessions, and then and what's going to happen today. So so yeah, so just for a little background for people that are listening and aren't privy to what we spoke about offline, is that you're in your video. Your calendar looks very much like mine, except it's a real world calendar, right? And you went point for point over some activities that 3 characters, right? It was, you focused on 3, A, B, and C.
Correct.
We're doing, and you showed like how that works, right? With coordinating on the calendar. So I'll do the same. My calendar, you'll notice, has made up names for the months. I did, for simplicity's sake, right? If as I move it over, you could see all this, right?
Yes.
Okay. As I move it over, like, so this is, you're now looking at a different culture's calendar. There's a total of 4 of them, although I'm ditching one of them because that never really played out. So we have 3 calendars. In the future, sorry for the scrolling, I had to make it 100% just to make sure you could see. In the future, you'll notice 2 years from now, it's going to come together. Oh, I deleted it because we didn't get there yet. All right, it's going to come together. I'm actually going to start using one calendar with notes on the side as opposed to the 4 calendars I have lined up currently, because that got a little confusing. So let's go back to the current day. So right now, I can realistically say we have 3 separate campaigns going on at the same time. 3 separate parties, I should say. The one which I will run tonight is right here, what I'm showing now. I'm going to reference this one here to the left to show how I align things. And then when you move over to the right, I won't do it because it's a lot of scrolling, is where the furthest point ahead currently lies. And that's 8 months ahead of the other 2 parties. And where that left off was a large battle, which will be run in chainmail. I use chainmail for large, mass scale combat. And so since that battle has not occurred and has nothing leading up to it has affected the outside world just yet, I could safely, and this is where I'll use the word pause, I can safely pause that, right? And what we'll probably do is just slowly adjudicate the battle, because unfortunately I'm all online, as many of us are now. I'm in an odd position where everybody in the group I'm discussing here is actually very close friends or even family, but we all live in different locations, so we're forced to play online, even though we've known each other for 20 plus years. So what we'll do with chainmail is we'll just slowly, I made a totally separate battle map, totally separate room for that, and we'll just slowly adjudicate it over time. But calendar wise, it won't come into play until that day, which is already marked on the calendar. So similar to what you do, but much farther ahead. Now, these 2 campaigns, though, which I'd like to discuss, it's actually 3 campaigns, 3 separate parties, I should say. They are in a little more risk of bumping up against each other, right? So currently, as you can see, the green, this is the main party, which did leave on the ship. So if you want to ask a question, these guys took Valmar's ship, in fact, and left. While that is occurring, Valmar, which is in the yellow, and some of these notes actually that are not highlighted, is back in town, so to speak, right? But he's in a totally different kingdom, far from where they are now, and events are occurring. So I, as you do, mark them on the calendar as they occur. Valmar has now moved. Here is where we're going to pick up today when I run my session. You can see I just grabbed that. And Valmar has actually moved almost 2 months ahead and to this point. Do you have like any specific questions about how I align these things or these events, or?
No, I can see what you're doing. And I also can appreciate why you're doing it this way because, like you said, that your parties are not in proximity to one another. And
Correct.
however, now that being said, I have a suspicion that if two of those parties move into the same area in the same region, you're going to want to bring them together somehow so that they're
So
tracking on
yeah,
the
give
same
me
dates.
if I continue, I'll move over to to that part of it. I just want to say one more thing about Valmar, and then I'll go on because this is a moment where even though it's not two parties, it's two separate areas, right? And I had to coordinate something. So as you see in the green here, this is present. That see where it says present day from, right? So that's my campaign. That's with the other most of the other players, and all the other players, and I'm going to run it tonight. Now they had Valmar's ship, and Valmar's ship. Um, I wanted it to reach. It's going to. It was going to return right when they got to a certain point and they knew they were going to stay where they were. The deal that had been made before they left was they were going to send the ship back. Valmar makes too much money off this ship. You can't keep it. Sorry. So the ship arrived back with Valmar, and this is I run these very quick rules that I wrote for adjudicating a ship, a transit with the ship. And it arrived back in town to teach. It's called where Valmar is on the 10th. So I knew once that event occurred, then Valmar would have access to the ship, and he used it 2 days later to travel to the capital city because one of his downtime activities was going to be purchasing more books for his library. Now I could have left and done this on land anytime I wanted to, but the land passage to the capitals become fairly dangerous with a dragon that's been seen in the area. So he didn't want to do that, especially when he was going to be mainly alone with some low-level henchmen since the party is gone. So he waited for the ship. So I could not do the downtime activities or accomplish the downtime activities until the ship came back.
Right.
So I see this as like a similar event as what occurs in your campaign, but simply not tied to the real world calendar. Because I don't want to affect the players, right? Like my players and their campaign in what I always call like an unnatural way, right? To them, unnatural to them. My main view, my main contention, so to speak, with 1-to-1 is that if you're not going to get the main benefit out of it, right? There's always a cost and reward, dynamic that you're working out, right? With any choice in life. So since my campaign is not structured in a way that's going to really see the benefits of the 1-to-1 downtime calendar, I feel this way is better because it doesn't offer what I would term as the negatives, which is where occasionally you're going to have to make a decision based on the real world calendar as opposed to the in-game calendar. Because I could always pause Valmar, right? That this is again where I'll use pause. I could always, especially since it's my character, but we'll just say it's my friend also DMs, which I'm going to get into in a minute. If it was one of their calendar alternate characters, I would just have to say, look, this could become contentious with what's going on in the world, so I need to pause it until the world catches up. And we would just wait. The downtime activity would still happen. He would still get to explore whatever it is he's looking to do. I want to buy lab equipment. I want to buy books. I want to study a particular spell. I want to make a potion, blah, blah, blah. We can come up with a million examples. But he would just have to wait. We're kind of like in agreement, I think here.
I think so.
Right?
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
But now I can bring up, if you want, where it does get where it can get sticky.
Okay, so while we're here though, so the party that's on the ship and they're sailing, where are they sailing to, and how long is their journey anticipated to be?
Okay, so let me drag my map here. All right, you can see my map now, right?
Yes.
Okay. So Satish. So this is the world map. So it doesn't have much detail on it. As a matter of fact, I just realized I left some of these labels on that I like to take off on the world map. Um, so I'll just point it out. But over here is where Valmar is, roughly, right about here, and that is where the ship left from. If I remember correctly, without having to count these hexes again, I think it was around 1,200 miles. And they first sailed down to this island as a navigational reference point. And where we left off, they had just reached this island. So the journey is actually complete. What was like this? I mean, I can go over when it occurred. If there's like, what did you specifically
So,
want
like,
to focus on?
what was the in-game calendar day, and what was the real-world calendar day when they started the journey?
Actually, I can give you the real world calendar because I think I put it on my sessions. All right, so the calendar day was known as party leaves a Pesh, party back in Satich. All right, so that this is where it started. It started on Hanojet. We'll just say October, right? Because it's the 10th. So it's the 10th month. Um, so the fourth day of the 10th month, in-game calendar, they left. They arrived at that first island I pointed out on the 10th of the 10th month. So it took 6 days to get to that island. In the meantime, Valmar's birthday passed. I hate that it's focusing on my PC for the side
That's
stuff.
all right. That's all right. It's your
Yeah,
game.
but when I go into the other when I go into the other campaign, it's not the case. But and then he founded an order, and then they fought this vampire on Paradise Island. Then that was the end of a session that occurred in the real world on. I have to remember. Let's see, because I didn't label them on this chart. So session 1 was a different adventure. So session 2 was when they left. We adjudicated the first leg of travel, and they fought a giant squid and a vampire. So that was that where we're on the 10th. So this gets us to 1010 in the world.
So
And then the
session
next
2 on 116. So that whole
116.
strip was on 116.
Correct. So roughly, what is that? 8 days past in game. No, 1, 2, 3, 7 days in game occurred in session. I gotta switch back. Session 2 on 116.
Right. And so is
So
it
then
like,
it
do you play every
go
two
ahead.
weeks? Is that how it works? Do you play every 2 weeks?
Generally every 2 weeks, although we sometimes play more. Like actually we're gonna play today, and then we're gonna play.
Another item that can hamper the calendar to the real world calendar, because sometimes if you don't play
Too
for a
much time
large enough
passed.
gap, 2 weeks or 3 weeks, then down,
Yeah.
um, which, and if you, especially if you look in the old wargaming books, a lot of times when these guys would play the old map-based wargame campaigns, um, a campaign turn was 1 week, and so whatever
Mhm.
happened, in the week between February 1st and February 7th, happened in the game world too. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
during that week, you could move your forces around or you could do whatever, but you didn't get ahead. You wouldn't move your forces ahead because you didn't know if you were going to bump into another army or what have you, um,
Uh,
which is a
yeah, in
little
the
bit
game.
different from this. But if you stretch it out, to where your sessions are every 2 weeks, then by necessity, you're going to have to be a little more flexible with that
Yep.
time. And in the other direction, back in December, I ran a play by post Kriegspiel game where each turn was 20 minutes. And every 20-minute turn took place on a daily basis. So in order to play, we played for what? We played 11 days. So
You had to log in at
just
least once a day.
just a couple hours, went by. It was one morning, that this battle happened, but we did it every single day. The players had to turn in their moves. Now,
Yep.
that being said, I will be the first to admit that that is a big project, and do not undertake something like that if you don't have some free time, because resolving those 20-minute turns for 6 different players on 2 teams took about 4 to 6 hours a day. And so it was big. I won't be doing something like that again. If I do, I will be using real Kriegspiel blocks on a real map on a table that I can leave set up in my basement, rather than using Tabletop Simulator and trying to do things that way,
You
because
know, and
it
actually
was
that makes
very time consuming.
that really makes you wonder, like, is a lot of this a function of the fact that so many of us are playing online nowadays, whereas we would have been in person adjudicating whatever game it is, right?
Right,
Like you would
right.
have
Yeah,
a
40
few
years ago,
sessions.
40 years ago, this all happened in person.
Yeah.
Um, and in some ways it's easier, in some ways it's harder, because there are I, I don't like I don't like to say, well, there's more demands on our time now, because I don't believe that there really are demands on our time. There are opportunities for us to spend time and waste time that people didn't have 40 years ago. And I
Yep.
remember those days. I mean, I remember a world without answering machines. You know what I mean? It was a completely different world. Um,
Yep.
I remember when the phone rang, you had to go to a place in your house where the phone was, because it was attached to the
Yeah.
wall, and you didn't know who was calling, right? So you had to answer the phone to find out who was calling.
And if you're expecting the wrong person to call, you had to hope you were the one who grabbed it.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Um, so I mean, yeah. So I think there's a lot of pros and cons to doing it,
But before we move on,
but
I do want to discuss my one.
go
I
ahead.
do have an example of where it does become a little tricky in my case, right? So if we move over, you could see that we have mostly aligned where it says party in Eslania. This is a separate campaign, but what is going on in that campaign could, well, will definitely affect world politics, right? Will it affect our characters directly? No, but you know, this game, the point of this game is to get your characters involved, right? So in that sense, it does. So how do I say this? All right. So this was a whole campaign. I'm going to scroll up again. I apologize for scrolling. As you can see, this was our previous campaign. This is my friend DMs, right? So this is why I have Valmar, just to go into that. I am not the guy who has a DM PC. Valmar exists and other characters exist because we share DMing in the same world, just different regions.
Yep.
This area is called Grandish. I primarily DM in an area that we call Geneva, rip off of Lake Geneva, right? Of course. So as you can see, all these notes, this was a campaign that was going on, and it's building up and it's building up. And what my friend apparently was building up to, we come to find out, is that there's some sort of civil war brewing between the two competing factions on that island. And when I say factions, I don't mean the players, because again, this is where the play styles differ, right? At least to this point. Not that we can't become that. Of course we could. If these characters that exist currently get to 9th, 10th, 11th level, that's going to happen regardless, right? So, but that is definitely a point where we differ in that we're not starting from that point right off the bat. So we get to here, and now what you see here is where we stopped. And the reason we stopped was because I knew, as the DM over to the right, I knew what was occurring over there that they did not know. One of their characters did, because he had made a journey and had returned. So I told him what he would know based on having journeyed to that land. And then some other messages got passed by ships, right? So the whole rumor thing that everybody gets. So there was some knowledge building up between the two lands. But it did finally get to a point where I, as the primary DM, said to my friend, we need to switch off, because what is occurring in your campaign is now getting far too close to openly affecting my side of the world, so we need to switch off so that we can get them close to that time frame, right? Now, of course, we discussed my side already, and they've surpassed it. So you would naturally think, well, what did you accomplish because they surpassed it? Well, time has surpassed because of the player's actions. And this was another point that keeps coming up, right? Where, and again, not you, totally not you, I want to make that clear, but it comes up where, oh, without one-to-one time, the players don't have the ultimate agency, or the DM may just be running them through his story or whatever. Well, this is an example of where that's specifically not the case, because they opted to do something different than I had planned, so to speak. And so they left. So now I was cleared to go further because the party is gone. So now, again, we're back to where I just need to track the events on the calendar so that if they return, I know what they know, or I know what they see, however you want to put it.
Right. Now, that being said, what would have happened if they had taken a zig instead of a zag and headed right into the other campaign area? What if they had decided to move into, so Valmar's on the 7th, right? What happens if the people that are back here on the 4th decide to head your way? They,
Yep, a good question. Yes.
you know what
So
I mean?
so
So, and because
I,
that could be an issue, especially if the people that are, what is that, Fuata? Um,
sorry, yeah, I moved it again. Yeah,
those
yes.
guys over there, or on the 5th, I should say, when they're in Aslania, if they move over to the other area, okay, and say that date was January 16th, but on January 16th, Valmar is way over here, and he's 6 weeks ahead. What happens
Well,
then?
so
Now you're running into the problem where you may have a.
not necessarily. So here, let me, because I'm definitely not going to say it can't ever occur, because it definitely can. And that would go to if we surpassed the battle that I had mentioned that's marked off 8 months ahead in a different part of the world, because that's a very earth-shaking battle, and I can't surpass that. So I do have one of those moments, right? But I know it. So if we do get close to it, and we have not yet adjudicated that, and have to pause everything and finish that battle, because it actually could result in an entire kingdom of dwarves being wiped on that.
To play devil's advocate, what happens if one of the parties does something that prevents that? Is that
I don't.
but if
So
like what I'm saying is, if party one is playing
yeah,
8 months ahead of everyone else and they're maneuvering armies around on the board, is there something that party three could do 2 months from now, but six
I
months
know what you mean. Yep.
behind the first party, that could make it impossible for that battle to even happen?
If they can come up, well, how do I say it? So first of all, those PCs currently don't know what's going on in that part of the world. Like that. Those two parts of the world are not connected. They will become connected in a way prior to that battle, but just prior to that battle. I'm not gonna say they can affect it. If they did, though, which would be awesome, I would love to see that. By, like, say, bringing another army into the fray or whatever. I would just not run that back. I guess the best way to illustrate it would be to show again back to continue my. Let me continue my example using these two parties, right? These two campaigns. It's a little clear. It's a little more clear than that battle. Is that okay?
Yeah.
You follow what I mean? Yeah. So, where was it? So when you were asking, so this here, the 29th, right up until this point, which puts them, about 7 days ahead of where that party stopped, but already behind, or already within the time frame of where they could have realistically heard the important knowledge, right? So don't focus on news, the important news. Don't focus on the PCs themselves. Let's talk about the world events. I think that's what kind of confused me for a second, because it's not so much the PCs that are affecting my version of the calendar. It's more the world events that were swirling around them, right?
Right.
So um, news reached Geneva that something had occurred, fairly eventful in Grandish, and the reason that's a little more important than it sounds for the PCs themselves is that two of those PCs, Valmar being one of them, were previously in Grandish. One of them's from Grandish. Valmar is from somewhere else. It's a big long story, but he was there for a while. So to the rest of the PCs, they realistically shouldn't care about that news. They should just be like, well, that sucks, but I don't care. But Valmar and Tigran is the name of the other one. Valmar and Tigran have a lot at stake, right? Valmar has a house over there, and Tigran has his entire family over there. Well, Valmar was not going to get involved, and again, at this point, because I'm in control, he's a DMPC, so I tend to hang back, right? But Tigran, he opted based on what had been presented to him on the 22nd and up to the 24th. I'm just trying to remember when it occurred. Some news that he had gotten, he opted to stick with the plan that the rest of the group had made. And so at that point, he kind of like, the player kind of like freed me up again, right? And he relieved the pressure, because otherwise what we would have done, most likely, is we wouldn't go back to these characters, but there's two battles that are going to occur over in Grandish, and we would have had to go back and accomplish those battles, adjudicate those battles before returning to the PCs. So I don't want to leave it where it's thought that I'm describing like, oh man, it's confusion, and we have
No. I understand where it is, and I think
it just forces us to adjudicate things that maybe we were going to shelve for a little while.
Right.
But
and it also, I think it shows that more often than you may like, you have to put your thumb on the scale.
Well, I wouldn't describe it that way, only because
and I'm only going to say it, to compare and contrast with a system that's calendar. You do it in 8 months. I can roll random events to happen, but they may or may not happen depending on what happens today and tomorrow. And
true.
I don't have to retcon anything, because if I
Let's
say
mention one. Yes.
if I say that if I say I roll a random event for April, that there's going to be uh, I don't know, a fire in the port district or something like that, because of XYZ. Well, any number of things could happen between now and then that may preclude that from happening at all.
Sure. Yeah, I
And
mean, if we were
if I had a party that was goofing around or adventuring, and they got up to that random event, and I decided, okay, it'll be fun to catch them in this fire, so I have the fire. But say the fire is caused by a magical creature or what have you, but 2 weeks behind that party, the other party comes along and captures that magical creature or defeats
kills
it,
a magical
and
creature,
destroys it.
yeah,
Now there's no fire, but I've already played the
yeah,
fire, and so now in one timeline, the port is burned down, and the party A had a fight with this fire creature in the port area, but 2 weeks earlier is party B, and they've killed the fire creature, and so there won't be a fire in the port.
yeah. I think that's where the different players comes in, right? Like that would be a point where I'd have to say the play style comes into effect, because I mean, not that it can happen. Obviously someone could turn around and do something I completely did not anticipate, but at the same time, I'm dealing with the same players. So like both of these parties that I'm discussing, except for one guy who is new to the group and is only involved in the part that I'm showing now. So he doesn't have characters in either one of the other parties, they're all the same. So like, no matter fight it as much as you want, but it's tough, right? So there is always going to be a minor, in my case, where the same people are running the different PCs. I feel like there's always going to be that little effect, right? So
because
if one of them,
go ahead.
if one of them was to say something that I didn't feel was in line with their character, and it sounded like they were going to get involved, right? So let's just say PCA, I don't remember their names that my friend is running. I can't remember, but let's just say PCA over in Grandish suddenly says, I think we should all go to Geneva. I just heard about it. I may step in and say, why? What's your motivation? Because if you can explain it, that's fine. But I'm getting you, player A, know what's going on in Geneva, and you'd rather be involved in that. See what I'm saying? Like, yes, would I stop them? Yes. No, probably not. In the end, I probably wouldn't, because my guys are smart enough. They'd probably dance right around me and make me think it's not metagaming. But I'd probably have that discussion to try and avoid that much of a bumping together. Because I'd be in a double, the same guy possibly running against himself.
Right.
You know, I got so characters.
Exactly. Having players fight each other. Now, I've heard of that happening in other campaigns, and I've read session reports about that. So that's kind of funny. But to get back to the sailing exercise, we're running that. If that was going to happen in my campaign, get on this boat and we're going to sail 6 weeks. We're not going to drop out of the campaign for 6 weeks. You know, if they leave, hey, they're not going to show back up on April 1st, right? Because number one, any number of things can happen between they're on the boat, right? Yeah. So the way I would manage that, being tied to the real calendar, is they leave today, and then on the 20th, when we have our next session, we'll spend a few minutes, and I will have already rolled for some random encounters, and they may even do it in downtime before the session and say, hey, this is what happened this week to your guys on the boat. What do you want to do? Yeah. And I would do that every single week. So every single week the players would get an update as to what was happening with their characters on the boat. And we wouldn't necessarily have to do a session. And so then the session that we do on the 20th would be the Tuesday night group of players playing a different batch of characters.
Yeah.
And so they would have then two sets of characters doing things, but because one is on a ship sailing out in the ocean, they obviously can't, interfere with each other. Now, at the same time, I might send a message to them, say on March 1st, that your ship is going past an island and you see another shipwrecked on the shore for their session, for example. They can get back to me and say, hey,
focus on them.
The group that's on land, they're going to go ahead and do XYZ things that they can do, and that don't require us. We want to play the group on the boat because we want to go check out that wreck. And so into the trip, they can make a detour and go check it out and spend a whole session doing that.
Example of that you could see. Yeah. It's a little less. It's not as well. No, basically, it's the same thing. There's two examples, right? So you see the green, right? The green boxes are the main campaign, so to speak. You see where it says Glomper Falls here on the 20th and Hagen right here, right? So I run in that town of Satij. We had discovered a dungeon in a burnt out area. I won't pull up the map card. So basically, they have town. It's right there in town. Nice and convenient. So we have separate characters, and then Valmar. Well, I shouldn't even say separate characters because they're the characters that have now left on the campaign. They've been in that dungeon from time to time. We even maintain a vault in that dungeon. So their treasures. So that would be my version, sort of what you just described. Where now that back to the real world, right? Real world. I played. I forget what that day was again, but I believe we said it was 116. Right? Was the 22nd here?
Yeah.
So now in the next, actually 2 weeks pass and we play on the 24th. But then within the next 2 weeks before we got to the 29th in game, whoever it was, my friend Sean, who is Tigran's player, usually is the one. So I'm going to use him as an example. Sean probably texted me and was like, yo, can you play tonight? And I was like, yeah, you know what? I can. So let me see who's available. So I believe we only got my friend Rob. So just myself, Sean, and Rob now run my random dungeon where I do run Valmar as a PC because we're generating the dungeon as we go. It's completely random. I have no idea what's going on, so I may as well play, right? And then when combat starts, I step back a tiny bit and I do my DM duties and they mainly run the combat and make the decisions. So on the 28th, we would have done that. Now, where it differs is that well, it doesn't really differ because your example, they were on a sailing expedition as well, right? So they were gone. So whatever happened in that dungeon couldn't really affect the people
Right.
that had already left.
Right.
So yeah, it's effectively the same thing.
But what it's
But
not,
and
and I
in this,
think, but what it's not, and I think this is an important distinction. What it's not is, okay, your characters have got on this boat, and now they're out of the campaign for 6 weeks. You can't touch them. You can't, they've sailed away, and they will not be available to play at all or do anything, until April 1st.
no, I agree with you. When
And
people
that's and
say that,
that's
I
not,
believe that's
and
a common
people
misconception.
people have that misconception because they think that because you're playing according to the calendar that you can't touch them. Now, the
No,
thing
and
is,
that's
they
without even
they
going
aren't,
into the worst.
they don't go 6 weeks out in one day. You know what I mean? So in a week they go a week out. So there's still you can still touch base with them each week, and they still get to do downtime things. If there's an encounter, right, and the people on the boat run to whatever, and they get in a fight, and somebody's wounded, then he's going to have to spend the 13th to the 20th healing. It still happened, and it still follows the calendar. And if they decide,
I have to defend you here because it's kind of an odd misconception to have, considering what I'm gathering from our discussions here and prior. That trying to accommodate is so that you can go back and forth with these characters. I don't know where someone would gather that you're delving them for so long. I'll be the first to admit that's what we're doing. I'm using my strict version of timekeeping so I can shelve. I'm scrolling over. I don't know if you're still showing my calendar. So I can shelve these guys. Where is it? Oh wow, is it more than 8 months? Where is that battle? Oh, sorry, there's one more calendar. That's what threw me off. To here, which is 8 months ahead. Um, so that would more be a description of how I do things. Where
right, and but see,
where
and also, but so structurally though, structurally, the people that are participating in this battle on the plains, they're the same players as are
same
playing
player,
in the other areas.
correct.
And
But with
and
one small
so
caveat, their PCs are not directly involved, so I can adjudicate the battle pretty much at any time,
right,
right? So their
but
PC
what I'm getting at
action,
is those are the same players. You have the
correct. They're the
same
same.
you have the same five actual people participating
Yep,
as 15 different characters in three different areas.
correct.
Whereas I have six different people, three, for instance, that are participating on two separate days in the same area. And so for
Yeah,
me, the 1-1 pace setting enables that sort of activity. It's one party from playing out 8 months in advance and then not being able to play anymore, right? Because so say for instance, your people that are out 8 months in advance players can do other things in other games. You've played that out, and now it can just sit there, right?
yeah,
Like you said,
yeah.
it's on
The
it's on a
players
shelf and it
themselves
doesn't
don't have to
matter.
sit there.
So, but
Yeah,
if we were to map this to my game, I would have three different groups of players. And if I let one group get 8 months out in advance, you know, then I would
then they're
not
stuck.
be
Yeah, yeah, they're
I
stuck
wouldn't be
actually
sticking to
sitting
the
there.
calendar. Now,
Yeah,
now that being said, if something happened where they fell into like a time warp or something like that and wound up 8 months in the future, then I would put them on a shelf, and then that group of players would create a new batch of characters and just play those characters for the next 8 months.
yeah,
And maybe they're related, maybe they're friends with, maybe they're in the same guild and they know that the other party went through this time warp, and so they're going to that time warp and bring them back. I think not only enabled but structured by the calendar, which would, because say for instance that time warp is going to close on March 1st, February 18th. They have to get their act together and they have to play the sessions and they have to not goof around. They've only got 3 sessions to get to that time warp before it closes.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that creates their game day February 13th and game day March 1st. There's no tension. There's no less. I mean, because if you have an in-game deadline of March 1st, but it's to really have tension.
Feeling it from the player's point of view, right? Because the tension will be there. Like an example I always like to give up to use is when another game I play in that doesn't use a timeline at all, but that doesn't come into play here. We tend to stop. We run very long combats, right? So the sessions tend to be a role playing session, and then it ends with a combat about to start. And then next week we pick up and we run the combat because it's probably going to take a while. There's a lot of PCs, and that DM likes to use a lot of monsters, right? A lot of very powerful monsters. So it's not that we're doing like a 5e type thing. It's just that there's so much going on. It ends up taking hours. So what ends up happening is that in that week between, the players are discussing, except for me, because I'm very against this, the players are discussing what they're going to do. And I always like to point out, well, you realize we left off and we're going to pick up literally a split second later, like a millisecond later. Sometimes we've already rolled initiative. So there really shouldn't be any discussion going on. And the reason I feel like I'm mentioning that now is because the time tension is not there, right? Because you're sitting back and 7 days in real world are going to go by. But I would hope that the players would focus from the mindset of the PC where that time tension is still there, because that PC is still about to scream his war cry and charge after the beholder or whatever it is, and that's where we left off.
Right, but I think we're talking about two different kinds of tension there. In that, yes, there will be tension once the game starts again. It'll be okay. We have to fight this monster, yada yada. But if they only have 3 sessions to accomplish these things, they're not going to want to goof around with an hour-long combat, right? They want
Oh, I
to,
see what you're saying. Okay,
they want
okay.
to, they've got to get through the session. Say they have to travel 500 miles by March 1st, okay, and they have
Yeah.
3 sessions to do that. If they keep getting bogged down by random encounters and fighting these monsters and such, where they're spending all their time fighting battles instead of, rocking across the countryside, they're not going to make it. And
But
so
see that, but
it
I
would
think that,
change it would change their perspective and change maybe even or definitely change the choices they would make,
sure.
because if they have to get to a certain point by a certain time in the real world, then they are not going to, because they can't just spend 6 sessions fighting monsters. They have to
No.
spend
But see,
0 sessions fighting monsters. They have to be moving and moving and moving.
they have
So
to be
instead of
moving.
engaging those monsters, they're going to evade those monsters. They're going to maybe take a long way around instead of going cutting through the swamp. They'll go around the swamp so they can
See, but
avoid the.
I would only contend that that would be a function of having no time, right? Or no strict timekeeping records or flexible. Remember, my timekeeping is not flexible. How it passes for us to play is flexible, but it's still passing. Meaning, like if well, let's use the example of that battle, right? So let's just say the party that's currently involved in a campaign comes back before the 8 months is up, and they return to the town and they hear, oh, what's going on? There seems to be some mobilization going on. Sure, we're sending a ship over to. We got word that there's a battle about to occur in the Dwarven lands, and we're going to send the ship. Now they're involved, right? And they jump on. That time crunch still exists. Now we might pause, right, because the session's over and no time passes, and we're going to pick up where we were. But they still have to make it within the game time frame. So I think we're still the same.
Well,
In what
except for the fact that theoretically they could spend 1 session on the boat or they could spend 6 sessions on the boat, right?
Sure, yeah, that's where the not being true. That is where
And so that's and maybe being on a boat wouldn't be the best example, but say you have a druid character who needs to harvest his mistletoe on the full moon, right? And the full moon is tomorrow. Or
well,
say
he's going to make
the
the choice.
full so or the full moon is next week, right? He
Yeah,
has to do the things he needs to do. And you can go ahead and have, in tonight's session, he can play all the way through to the 21st when the full moon is and harvest his mistletoe, and that's hunky dory. But next week on the 20th, he can't play the druid because the druid is off harvesting mistletoe.
I still feel it may be me just not being
And
able to explain it
and
correctly.
but also if say the druid goes off and he gets captured by orcs,
Yeah,
right, on the 15th, right, he we can't spend 5 sessions for the rest of the party searching for him and trying to find him and
trying to
rescue
find him.
him
Yeah.
and say that only takes 1 day. And now it's in the real world, it's March 30th, you know,
And
February
that battle's occurring.
February has passed. The full moon has passed. It's gone. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there's an
Well, why?
added
Let me ask
an
this
added
way.
level of
Maybe.
tension, I think, because they have to accomplish their stuff without without
Why do you
spending
think?
all of these sessions, kind of.
But why do you think that couldn't occur in mine? That's what I think it was what is confusing me because
Well,
everything you're saying,
because February 20th may or may not happen on February 20th in your game, right? When it's
no, that's
when
not that.
it's
No.
when it's
Oh,
when it's February 20th in my game, it's
oh,
February
correct.
20th
Okay,
in the
okay.
real world,
I'm following. I'm following.
right?
Yep.
So say, and this I guess is another example. Say I need to go from here to a place 100 miles from here by the
Yep.
20th, right? By next week I have to be there. And so I travel and we're playing this out, we're playing this travel and I run into things that slow me down, but
Sure.
it's going to take, it'll take me 6 days to get there without any
And I only had
problems,
five.
right? And so, but I've only got 5 in the real world to do it. So I can't spend this session and the next session and the next session making this journey, playing out all these things. I have to get everything done and arrive by next session, by next week, by the 20th in the real calendar. And so that's going to change the way that you approach challenges in the game.
See, I think actually now I think I got it, and I think the difference is that so we both understand that it's still going to take right. If my guy detours for a day, he's still detoured for a day, right? So I think that's what was confusing me at first. I was saying, well, this can still happen, right? If they make a stupid detour, they wasted time. I get it. I think this is where we are bumping up against the
Right.
difference of
But they can't spend
I
the
don't
whole
want.
session. They can't spend the whole session tonight on February 13th. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They can't sit there and decide to do a detour and go into a dungeon and spend the whole session delving in this dungeon, on February 13th, and then come out, and then it's still the night of February 13th, but it's been 4 hours and now the session is over and they haven't made it. And now
Yes,
they
because the
can
clock's
now
going to continue.
they can travel in downtime if they want to continue that, but they're going to have to face encounters that we may have to do play by post. There are ways around it, and there are ways we can keep it going, but they don't have the, let's call it, the luxury of spending 4 sessions of game time to do one day in the calendar.
Right. All right. Now I see what you're saying. Okay. Yeah, I got a little confused. Yeah. See that my only answer to that would be that is the thing that I actually don't want to introduce into the game is where you hey, oh wait, can you hear me? Because my thing just
Yep,
timed out.
I can hear you.
That's where you'll hear me say things like, I don't want that influence of out of game um, time constraints to affect us, and people will bring that to like the ridiculous examples of, well, I have to take a poop, so does he have to? Well, that's stupid because we're smart enough to understand that.
Right.
So, but in actual game terms, yes, I would actually prefer to avoid that. I would prefer to stop. So time, right? Like this was the part that was confusing me. Time in the game, it's passing, right? We both agree it's passing the way it's passing. Except once the session stops, in my case, yes, it stops. And if it takes us 4 sessions to play out the 3 days of travel, we both have 3 days of travel. But your 3 days of travel are going to occur. So the players are going to have to set themselves up for the best case scenario for that 4 days of travel, right?
Right.
Or did I say three? I
They
don't
have
know.
to finish that travel in this session.
Correct. In my case, they would have more real world time to accomplish that. I just want to make the point that I feel it's the people who don't track time at all that are overlooking that tension completely because my tension still exists, but only in game. Only in regards to that 4 days in game, and we could technically, you're right, play 4 sessions if they can compress enough activity into what is that 96 hours.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Now here's another interesting thing. When I first started my previous campaign before I started the Tanasport one, we were just playing pause time, and we played for 6 weeks, and it was literally 2 days of game time.
So 6 weeks past in game, 2 game.
No, 6 weeks passed in the real world. We had six
Oh, okay.
sessions. We had
Six. I got.
six 2.5 hour sessions,
Yep.
but only 2 days went by in the game world.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've never had an example like that, but it could happen. Like I would use my battle, right? Just because of technology. Um, I mean, I could show it to you. Actually, we can. It's going to take a minute to pull up. It'll prove.
That's okay. That's okay. I'm getting an overloaded warning, so I don't.
Yeah, we're actually going to 3 o'clock now.
Still, yeah, and it's
Well,
coming.
quick,
Yeah.
then let me just say, like that battle, just because of the technology itself being so slow, because I put so many units on the board, we're using Owlbear. That may take, I don't know, it may take 10 sessions to adjudicate the entire battle, but I'm looking at that as like, it's a battle. Do I really want to introduce something like one-to-one time when really what's constraining us isn't even so much laziness, right? It's more just literally it's going to take that long to move those units around and roll the dice involved. And, so I would be forced, I feel like I'd be forced to make a choice between two things. Do I adjudicate the battle quickly myself, or do I change the makeup of the battle so that we can adjudicate it in one day? And that's where I feel like doing it my way is a little better because I don't have the out of game time constraint. So I could play it out as long as it takes, and we can do all the individual little skirmishes because we don't have that imperativeness, so to speak, to get it finished.
Right, right. Now, this would be a separate conversation, but
Oh, we can definitely do this again. By the way, this was great. So
yeah,
if you
and
want to,
I can give you some tips to make that go faster, and you can even play Chainmail Theater of the Mind if you want to. Because I've done two big battles just over Discord using chainmail rules, but
mhm.
literally theater of the mind. Um,
Oh,
but
I would love to see that in action because I would love to do that. I
yeah,
am
I can help you with that. Um, but yes, we are at an hour and a quarter.
nice. Yeah, we went over what we thought we would.
But yeah, it
And
was good. It was. I think this was fun, and I think that while you're not slaving your calendar to the real world calendar, you're still following the procedures and keeping strict time records.
yes, I think in the
That's what's
end,
really important. I think
yeah,
that's the most important part of timekeeping is strictly tracking what's happening. Um,
I absolutely agree. I think if you completely ignore timekeeping, I mean, look, if you want to, if again, I had said in the very beginning, I do play in a campaign where the DM is just stringing together little modules, and we have a blast. We really do. But I wouldn't call that a camp. I used the word campaign a minute ago, but it just kind of came out. But if I was thinking about it, would I call that a campaign? No, I would call that a game. We're having a great time. We're playing characters, but in the end, that's really not much different than playing Monopoly at your kitchen table. What we are talking about, which definitely requires strict timekeeping, is a campaign.
yeah, definitely, definitely. And I would really be curious to see with those two groups that are close to each other and something might be happening. I would be really curious to see what would happen if just for say 3 sessions you you mashed the real world calendar and the game calendar together and said, okay, guys, this is what's going to happen for the next 3 sessions. Um, you know, when we're going to play tonight on the 13th, and then next week when we play, it's going to be the 20th. So keep that in mind for where your characters are.
Um, in my case, I can actually answer that pretty quickly. Unfortunately, I would lose two guys right away. Um, one guy runs a business, and it's all he could do to get away just to play with our scheduled sections, and he'd be pissed because he'd well, that means I'm going to miss things, and there's no way around that, and blah blah blah, and I can't blame him, you know. Um, and then my brother actually is in the army, and so he's not inconsistent with our time frame. That's actually why we play when we do, but any other time he would be, so he would end up missing a lot. So they it and you know, I mean, I think everybody does agree when we discuss this that that would be a consideration, right? Is that certain players would miss out on a lot more, and you got to make the choice on whether your style is okay with that, or some players, right? They play it that way, like so that's fine. Yes, I need to miss. I was actually invited to a game that doesn't do 1-to-1 time, but they do like a drop in, drop out type of thing. Whoever shows up, there you are, you know. So whatever. So it doesn't matter if you miss things. Um, in our case, our campaigns tend to be a little more structured along what's going on, so they would miss significant, you know, events. So I don't know. I mean, would I try it? No, I'm not saying no, but I do know how it would go, at least partially.
Well, yeah, and the thing is, though, it takes a change of perspective because and I don't think that they would have to miss anything. Um, what it would mean, perhaps, is that they would be adding characters to each session group. So maybe if they adventure off, and they go 9 days in the future, so they play on the 13th and they wind up on the 22nd, and your next game is on the 20th, then you don't play those characters. You play a second batch of
Right,
characters.
different characters. Yeah, I guess that would be the way to combat that, but I don't know
And
if the
that's
others.
right. And so, but see that, and that is a mechanic that is and it's required and enforced by slaving the calendars together.
Yeah.
So if your
Yeah.
characters get too far out in advance and the calendar hasn't caught up to them, then you have to play a different character. And